All I have are my clothes, she whispered. So she stripped for food until a human stepped in.
Eldrith, 7 wasn't the worst district left standing, but it was close. After the planetary collapse, when the trade federations pulled out and the weather regulators broke down, what remained of the colony's southern sector drifted into something worse than lawless, forgotten. No patrols, no aid drops, no enforcement of anything but silence. People lived here if they couldn't afford to live anywhere else. No one looked for opportunity in Eldrith 7. They just tried not to sink any deeper. Nyrene hadn't always lived like this. A decade ago, her kind had a voice at the Interspecies Council. A small one, yes, but a voice. The Alan-Zyrene hybrids were rare, often ceremonial caretakers or translators. She had trained for that once. Her ceremonial wrap, the one she still wore now, ragged and knotted at the side, was meant for council work. It wasn't supposed to cling to her thighs in the humidity or expose her shoulder because the adhesive bands had failed. It wasn't designed for street use or for bartering. Now she walked through rain-soaked alleyways, her feet dark with grime, trying not to shiver in the damp. She didn't want to look like she was suffering. That was dangerous in Eldrith 7. The moment you looked vulnerable, someone tried to trade something for your weakness. Most of the time, it was food. Sometimes it was worse. Rowan Darren had been on Eldrith for 3 years. Not out of choice, not exactly, but he had reasons. After the atmospheric collapse across several outer colonies, the Preservation Office had sent field techs to recover whatever pre-collapse data remained in the broken city cores. Rowan was one of them. A technician trained in analog data systems and environmental sensor archives, he was tasked with salvaging old weather station records, air quality logs, and early terraforming readings. Most of what he worked on would probably never be used again. Still, he did it. Quietly. Alone. He lived on the 3rd floor of a collapsed civic building, using salvaged solar coils and gravity-fed filters to keep a low-energy shelter running. Most days he walked the ruins, collecting storage chips from decaying terminal banks. At night, he restored them. He wasn't here to rescue anyone. He didn't get involved. That day, he had gone out for something simple, an industrial hose clamp. One of his oxygen recompilers had a leak in the reservoir loop. He passed through the narrow corridors of the market zone, where traders lined their stalls with whatever scrap, food, or fluids they could offer. His eyes were sharp but tired. He'd learned to scan without drawing attention, to navigate the market without brushing against anyone, and, above all, not to stop. He saw her on the 3rd pass. The alien woman, green-skinned, white-haired, wrapped in a fabric that barely held together, stood just beyond a steam cart, staring at the pot with a stillness that didn't look casual. She wasn't a beggar, not openly. Her posture was too proud for that, but her eyes gave her away. They kept flicking toward the vendor's pot, and then down her hands. She was considering something difficult. Rowan paused near the stall, long enough to see the vendor look at her with a practiced expression, an expectation, maybe even a familiarity. Then the vendor nodded. Not toward her, behind the cart, to the alley. She didn't move at first. Rowan was already turning away when he heard the soft scrape of footsteps on wet pavement. He stopped just before the alley's edge and looked back. She had followed the signal. Nyrene stepped behind the stall, into the narrow space lit by one dangling blue light strip and the reflection of water pooling between garbage bins. She kept her back to the wall. Her breathing had gone shallow, barely moving her chest. Her hands pulled at the knot near her shoulder, fingers clumsy from hunger and hesitation. She loosened it with a sudden jerk, letting the cloth fall partly down her side. Her words came next, low, almost robotic. All I have are my clothes. Just give me food. Her voice was hoarse from dryness. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. But something in her tone made Rowan stop. No one else moved. 2 men passed by and didn't look. A woman paused for a heartbeat, then walked on. The city didn't punish moments like these. It ignored them. Rowan stepped forward. She didn't hear him at first. Then she noticed the sound of boots stopping. She turned, expecting the vendor. Instead, she saw a man she didn't recognize, human, lean, maybe late 30s, with an unshaven jaw and storm gray eyes under his soaked hood. He didn't leer. He didn't raise his hand or voice. He just looked at her and said, "Put it back on." She flinched. He said it again, quieter. "Put it back on." Her arms pulled the fabric up slowly, cautiously. She didn't tie it, just held it closed. Rowan spoke again. "I have soup. You can come with me." No trade. She narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "Because no one else stopped." "That's not a reason. It's the only one I've got." He turned and walked out of the alley. Didn't check if she followed. Nyreen stood there, her hands tightening the wrap against her side. Her thoughts raced. This would be a trick, some elaborate setup to humiliate her later, to remind her she still belonged to someone else's idea of mercy. But he hadn't touched her. He hadn't made her promise anything. And he'd walked away, leaving the decision hers. No one had done that in a long time. She followed. Rowan didn't speak on the way. Neither did she. They moved through the dim corridors and broken stairwells of Eldrith, 7 without drawing attention, rain dripping from their clothes as they walked through pools of light and shadow. His home wasn't large. A converted service office with power patch from street panels and furniture salvaged from ruined admin blocks. There was a cot against the wall, a folding table and 2 chairs, a hot plate, a kettle, one window with the blinds stuck halfway down. He stepped inside first, tossed his wet coat onto a wall hook, and motioned for her to enter. She did, but slowly, like someone waiting for the door to slam shut behind her. He poured water into a cracked ceramic bowl and dropped in some dried root pellets. Stirred, let boil, poured it into a new bowl, and slid it across the table toward her. Nyreen didn't sit. She looked at the bowl, then at him. Her eyes searched his face, trying to find the demand he hadn't spoken yet. "It's just soup," he said. "Sit." She sat, her fingers wrapped around the bowl, holding the warmth like it might vanish. She didn't drink yet, just breathed. "I'm not used to this," she said. He nodded. "Most people aren't." She took a small sip, winced, swallowed, then another. The taste wasn't good, but it was food. She didn't notice her hand stop shaking until halfway through the bowl. When she finished, she finally asked, "What do you want from me?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. He stood, walked to a crate against the wall, and pulled out a thermal blanket. "Rest. That's all I want tonight." She stared at him. "You think I can just rest?" she asked. "I don't care what you think," he said. "I care if you sleep." He pointed to the cot. She stood, walked over, and sat down. Carefully, the wrap clung to her damp skin. She didn't lie down yet. She watched him as he knelt on the floor, unrolling his own mat. "You're not going to try anything?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you've had enough taken from you already." Her throat tightened. She looked away. In the silence that followed, she realized something unexpected. She wasn't afraid. Not completely. The rain outside deepened, tapping gently on the panel glass window. Inside, 2 strangers lay on opposite sides of a quiet room, both unsure what tomorrow meant. But for the first time in days, Nyreen wasn't sleeping for survival. She was just sleeping. The light inside the room shifted from muted amber to a cold gray as morning came, filtered through the dust-caked slats of the half-jammed blinds. Outside, the city remained unchanged, quiet, slow, indifferent. Inside, the air smelled faintly of boiled root and damp fabric. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, but everything still felt wet. Nyreen sat on the edge of the cot. She hadn't slept. Not fully. Her body had rested, but her mind had stayed alert, ears trained on every sound. The creak of the structure, the hum of old circuits, the man breathing on the floor. She hadn't removed the wrap, only adjusted it enough to curl under the thin blanket. It wasn't comfort. It was preservation. Now, she watched him. Rowan lay still on the floor mat, one arm across his chest, the other beside his head. His face was slack with sleep, lined with fatigue he hadn't spoken of. A small data terminal blinked faint green beside him, an old analog model, maybe pre-collapse. She recognized the interface. Atmospheric logs, calibration tables, civilian use, but valuable. He hadn't locked it. That confused her. She stood quietly, moved to the desk, and scanned the room. One coat, one extra blanket, one half-empty bag of root pellets. No weapons, no surveillance, no hidden terminals, nothing stashed in drawers or under the cot. Just tools, spare parts, repaired things. Nothing about this place made sense. If he wasn't a trader, wasn't a pimp, wasn't a patrol plant, what was he? She leaned against the wall and rubbed her arms. Her skin felt sticky from dried sweat. Her wrap clung in the worst places. She didn't want to ask, but she needed to. She needed water. Soap. Anything. He stirred. "You don't sleep?" he said without opening his eyes. She hesitated. "Not well." He sat up, pulled a shirt from the floor beside his mat, and slipped it on. "Bathrooms through the back," he said, nodding toward the cracked doorway beside the table. "The water pressure's trash, but it works." She didn't thank him. She just stepped in and closed the door behind her. Inside was barely more than a cubicle. A cracked mirror, a wall hook, a narrow pipe faucet, and a ceramic basin, stained but clean. The water trickled out with a low wheeze, barely enough to wet her hands. Still, she cupped it, splashed her face, scrubbed her arms, then hesitated. She removed the wrap slowly, carefully. It fell to the floor like discarded skin. She stood there for a while, staring at herself in the mirror. Her ribs were sharper than she remembered. Her collarbone looked like a rail line. The green hue of her skin had gone pale in places. She touched her cheek. It felt hollow. When she returned, the wrap was tied tighter, still damp. Her hair was braided loosely over one shoulder. He didn't comment. Instead, he poured 2 cups of red-boiled root broth, set them on the table, and slid one toward her as she sat. "You said you catalog atmospheric data," she said finally, her voice lower than before. Less defensive, more curious. "I recover it," he corrected. "Most of the terminals are dead, but some have backups. I pull what I can." "For who?" He paused. "Don't know anymore." That landed like a rock in the middle of their silence. "You do this for nothing?" Rowan sipped his drink. "Not nothing. I've got a contract. The payment's not credits, just access to supplies, gear. They don't care if I go dark down here, as long as I send back data streams." "You could have left," she said. He nodded. "Yeah. So why are you still here?" Rowan looked at her, not with warning, with thought. "Same reason you're still alive," he said. "I haven't found a better option." Nyreen sat with that. It wasn't cruel. It was honest. "You don't ask questions," she said after a moment. "Most men do." He shrugged. "I don't like being asked either." That surprised her more than it should have. She looked at her cup, turned it in her hands, then finally said what had been building in the back of her throat since last night. "I was supposed to be a translator. I trained for it. I passed the fluency trials in 3 systems. I was assigned to the diplomatic hall on Wraithen Station." Rowan didn't interrupt. "When the station lost funding, we were dismissed. Just unassigned. I couldn't afford passage off-world. My clearance lapsed. My stipend cut. I came here to wait for transfer paperwork." He frowned slightly. "How long ago?" 5 years. That was too long for any transfer. What happened to the others? They either left or stopped needing food. She said it without emotion, but her fingers clenched the cup tightly. He didn't press. "What about you?" she asked. "Who'd you lose?" Rowan's posture shifted. A flicker, barely visible but real. "I didn't say I lost anyone. You didn't have to." He looked away. "For a long time. She worked recovery," he said finally. "Same contract, different planet." She went into a cloud zone. Something ruptured. Biofilter didn't hold. "I wasn't there." Nyreen studied his expression. The lines were subtle, but etched deep. It wasn't grief that stuck, it was guilt. "You couldn't have stopped it," she said. "Maybe not," he answered. "But I still see her sometimes. In empty chairs, in locked drawers." That admission caught her off guard. She expected stone walls, not cracks. She didn't know what to do with them. "Thank you," she said. He glanced at her, unsure. "For what?" "For letting me sleep without owing you anything." Rowan nodded, not as a gesture of modesty, but of agreement. "You don't owe me anything now either," he said. But Nyreen didn't believe him. She wasn't used to believing anyone meant that. They finished their broth in silence. Later that day, when he left to check a collapsed municipal hub 2 blocks west, she offered to help carry tools. He declined, but handed her an old coat with patched sleeves. "It's too big," she said, holding it up. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "You look cold." She wore it anyway. As they walked through Eldritha's ruins, cracked tiles underfoot, broken cables overhead, people looked at her differently. Not with desire, not pity, with confusion. She wasn't for sale anymore. And that was the first time in years she started to feel real again. The power grid across Eldrith, 7 flickered unpredictably. Even in the safer zones, if you could call them that, lights went out for hours, sometimes days. But Rowan had rigged solar reserves in his unit, and as long as the panels weren't stolen or cracked during the night, he could keep his systems online. That made his place one of the few in the sector where a data terminal could still boot, and where Nyreen, for the first time in years, saw her old life flicker back into relevance. He sat hunched over the console that morning, a patched cable draped from one terminal to an analog drive rig he'd salvaged from the ruins of a defunct transport outpost. The screen blinked dull green, trying to reconstruct sensor logs from partial archives. It was tedious, technical work, mostly just cleaning metadata, renaming files, and rebuilding date trees. But Nyreen leaned in beside him, and after a moment she pointed. "You're nesting the wrong directory. That's a terminal-level stack, not a data block. You'll loop the sinkhole." Rowan blinked. "You read this stuff? I translated it. Before the war." He leaned back and motioned toward the seat beside him. "Then sit." She did. For the next hour, they worked together without talking much. Her hands moved with a fluid confidence he hadn't expected. She didn't just remember the old file structures. She corrected outdated formatting, flagged redundant code logs, and manually rerouted dead links through active relays. She hadn't just trained on these systems. She'd lived in them. "I thought this kind of work was classified," Rowan said after a while, watching her fingers tap through layers of recovery logs. "It was until the collapse." She didn't look at him. "Now no one cares. There's no one left to care." That silence again, comfortable but charged. It answered something unspoken in Chapter 2. Why was Nyreen really still in Eldrith 7? Why hadn't she tried to leave? The truth sat unspoken between them. Even if she'd had the funds, the transport hubs weren't taking anyone without verified ID chips. Hers had expired 3 cycles ago. No updates, no renewal options, no appeals. She hadn't stayed because she wanted to. She'd stayed because the system had deleted her. By midday, Rowan had stopped working just to watch her. Nyreen noticed. She didn't mind. "Why are you cataloging atmospheric records?" she finally asked. "The government that requested them doesn't exist anymore." He shrugged. "Contract's still live. There's a data core on Haven Station that still accepts uploads. Maybe they're building something back up. Or maybe it's just habit. You do it alone? I prefer it that way." She studied him. "That's not true. You're just afraid if someone gets close, you'll have to explain why you're still here." He didn't respond. "You lost someone," she said again. "But you also lost the reason you were doing this in the first place. You're just going through the motions." He turned to her, jaw tight. "And you're not." That landed hard. She looked away. He sighed. Not frustrated. Tired. "You're good at this," he said. "You want to help again tomorrow?" She nodded. That evening, they ate in silence again. Except this time, she didn't hesitate before reaching for the bowl. She sat on the floor, legs folded under her, the oversized coat draped over her lap. Her ceremonial wrap was drying over a pipe vent near the door. He caught her watching it. She noticed. "I should throw it away," she said. "It's useless now." "It's not," he answered. "It's proof." "Proof of what?" "That you survived." Her throat tightened. She didn't reply. Later, when the lights dimmed to their night cycle, she stood before the cot, holding the coat closed around her. Her hair was loose, still damp from washing. She looked at him across the room, standing by the console. "Can I ask something?" "Yeah. If I wasn't useful, if I didn't know how to code, would you still let me stay?" He met her gaze. Steady. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I saw you take your clothes off for food, and then put them back on when someone told you that you didn't have to. That's more strength than most people down here have left." That answer didn't shock her, but it reached something deep inside that hadn't been touched in a long time. She stepped toward the cot, sat slowly, then paused. "You never touched me. I won't unless you ask." She exhaled, slow, measured. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the coat. "That scares me more than if you had." "Why?" "Because it means I have to choose." Rowan didn't move. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." but the space between them stayed charged. Not from fear, not from obligation, from possibility. That night, she slept in the coat, not the wrap. She slept facing him on the cot, one hand curled under her cheek. For the first time, her body was covered not by something ceremonial or transactional, but simply warm. And for the first time, Rowan didn't dream of his past. He stayed awake longer than usual, just watching her sleep, making sure it was real. When he finally laid down, he did so with the faint, unspoken knowledge that the house no longer felt like just his. And neither did the silence. The wind outside had picked up during the night. On Eldrith 7, that didn't mean a storm. It meant dust, fine particulate lifted from the southern ruins, coating windows in a dull film. It meant tension in the walls, a soft pressure in the air that settled behind the eyes and made everything feel heavier. Rowan woke early, not from noise, but from the absence of it. The city was rarely silent. Even at night, generators hummed, traders argued, air processors stuttered across broken rooftops. But now nothing. No voices, no alarms. Just the quiet thrum of his own power reserve and the soft hiss of the kettle warming on low heat. He sat up slowly. The cot beside him creaked. Nyreen was still asleep, curled on her side, one hand tucked beneath the coat she still wore. Her white hair had fallen over her face, slightly damp at the roots. The makeshift pillow beneath her head was bunched fabric. She hadn't stirred. He studied her for a moment. There was no tension in her jaw, no tightness in her fingers. She wasn't bracing for something in her sleep. Not anymore. That alone was progress. When she woke, it was with a slow blink and a brief moment of confusion. Her eyes scanned the room, then landed on him. She sat up quickly, brushing her hair back. "You were watching me," she said, not accusing, just stating. "You look peaceful," he replied. "Didn't want to wake you." She looked down, smiled faintly, but said nothing. Breakfast was quiet. She drank broth and sorted power cables while he cleaned the air filters. Neither spoke much, but nothing felt unfinished. Their movements were fluid now, coordinated, like a rhythm was beginning to form between them. Two people navigating the same space without stepping on each other. By mid-morning, Rowan took her to the collapsed municipal block 2 streets east. He needed access to a vertical sensor rig buried beneath fallen scaffolding. Normally, he'd have gone alone. Today, he handed her gloves and a breathing mask. "You'll need this," he said. "The dust down there is corrosive." Nyreen slid the mask over her face. "You bring everyone you meet into the ruins?" "Only the ones who make my code run faster." That made her laugh, quiet, unexpected. The stairwell down into the core was half collapsed, but the lower levels still held. A long hallway of half-functioning lights led them toward the environmental archive, a boxy steel terminal embedded into a fractured support beam. Rowan went to work reconnecting power leads, while Nyreen crouched beside him, brushing away dirt and debris to access the uplink port. "You know," she said while wiping grime from a rusted console plate, "I think this is the first time I've felt useful since Wraith Station." "You've always been useful." "No," she corrected, "I've always been used." The words hung in the air between them. Rowan stopped working, turned to her. "You're not being used here." "I know. Do you believe it?" She didn't answer right away. "I'm trying to." They didn't touch, but something moved between them, a quiet understanding. When they returned to the apartment later, she asked if she could shower properly, if there was enough water. Rowan nodded, told her to take what she needed. She stripped down in the bathroom, this time without trembling fingers, and stood beneath the low-pressure stream as it rattled over her shoulders. The coat was gone, the wrap discarded. She took longer than she should have, just standing there, rinsing off the past, slowly, silently. When she came out, wrapped in a towel and nothing else, Rowan was by the window, adjusting a solar feed. She didn't speak, just stood in the middle of the room, watching him. He turned. She didn't move. Neither did he. Then she crossed the floor slowly, barefoot, towel clutched loosely in one hand. She stopped within arm's reach. "I don't know how to ask," she said. "You don't have to. I want to." Rowan's voice lowered. "Then ask." She stepped closer, bare feet touching his boots. The towel slipped slightly down her back. "Will you touch me, Rowan?" He reached up slowly, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. His fingers traced along her cheek. She closed her eyes, not from fear but from weight. The permission in his touch was heavier than demand. "Only if it's not a trade," he said. "It's not." He leaned in, didn't kiss her, just let his forehead touch hers. Her breath hitched. They stood like that for long moments, heat building, not rushed. No desperation, just need, human, real. When he finally kissed her, it wasn't a take. It is to stay. That night, they lay together on the cot, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand curled gently against her waist. They didn't speak much after. They didn't need to. For the first time in years, Nyreen didn't feel like someone surviving. She felt wanted. And Rowan, for the first time since the loss, didn't feel haunted by the past. He felt present. Whatever came next, it would not come with shame. It would come with choice. The next morning, Nyreen didn't wake startled. She stirred slowly, aware of the soft warmth around her, the steady rhythm of breath beneath her cheek, the gentle curve of Rowan's arm across her back. The cot was still narrow, the sheets still patched, the air still dry from the purifier vents, but none of it felt harsh anymore. She hadn't slept like this in years. Not deeply, not safely. When she finally opened her eyes, light filtered in through the blinds, pale and dusty. The quiet hum of the data rig filled the background, interrupted only by the occasional soft click of a wind-blown shutter. Rowan was already awake. She could feel the tension in his body, subtle but unmistakable. His arm hadn't moved, but his breathing had changed. She shifted, looked up. "You're thinking too hard," she murmured. He didn't smile, just sorting it all out. Nyreen sat up, pulling the blanket with her. "If you regret it, say so." "I don't," he said quickly, "but I'm not pretending it's simple." She looked down at her hands. "Because I was desperate?" "No," he said, "because I care. And I don't want to break that by moving too fast." He sat up beside her, rubbing the back of his neck. "You scare me a little," he added. She blinked. "I scare you. You could have walked away yesterday. After the ruins. After the shower. You didn't. You didn't lock the door." "I know." Silence settled again. But it wasn't cold. Just full. She stood, wrapped the blanket around her like a shawl, and crossed the room to the kettle. She didn't ask before filling it. She didn't ask before starting breakfast. Rowan watched her, still seated on the cot, his face unreadable, but softer than it had been before. "You know," she said without turning, "I thought I'd be gone by now." "Gone where?" "Anywhere. I never imagined staying in one place again." She paused. "Especially not with someone who doesn't want anything from me." He rose, stepped beside her. "That's not true." She looked at him. "I want you to stay," he said, "but only if you want to." Her throat tightened. She wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Instead, she asked, "How long have you lived like this?" He shrugged. 3 years. Maybe longer. I stopped counting. And before that, small team. Same work. I didn't talk much then either. She smirked faintly. Some things haven't changed. That made him smile. A real one. But that warmth didn't last. Because later that day, while scanning a fresh chip from a ruined sensor node, Nyreen noticed something odd. A recent file. Too recent. Its timestamp wasn't from before the collapse. It was from just 3 weeks ago. She narrowed her eyes. "Rowan." He turned in his chair. "What is it?" "This log. It's not environmental data. It's a personnel ping." He stood beside her, reading over her shoulder. It was a name. Her name. Not full. Just a partial registry tag. Alan Zyrini female. Unverified ID. Last known location. Eldrith 7. It had been flagged by a low-level survey drone. Not military, not patrol. But something had picked up her presence and transmitted it into a backup crawl. She felt her stomach twist. Rowan saw her shoulders tense. They're not coming. Not unless there's a bounty or a reason to act. You don't know that. I do. These flags sit in systems no one checks. Unless someone pushes it. Her voice dropped. What if they do? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat beside her, not touching her, just present. "You can leave if you want," he said finally, "but you don't have to run." Her reply came slower this time. "I don't want to leave." "Then stay." She leaned back in the chair, staring at the blinking green cursor. Her name flashed again on the screen. Not a threat, not yet, but a reminder. She wasn't invisible, and neither was what they'd built. That night, Nyreen didn't ask to be held. She simply crawled into the cot and folded herself beneath his arm like it had always been hers. Rowan didn't ask what she was thinking. He didn't need to. She was choosing to stay, not for safety, not for soup, but because for the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel like she had to earn her place with her body. She just belonged. And in the silence that followed, they both knew if anyone ever came looking, this time she wouldn't be alone. The flag didn't go away. Rowan deleted the file from his system, scrubbed the ping metadata, severed uplink routes, but still lived somewhere upstream. In a satellite cache, a relay node, a backup server with no assigned human. Eldrith 7 might have been ignored by the galaxy, but the systems above it still listened. Quietly, automatically, and sometimes, even quiet things reached the wrong ears. 3 days passed. Nyreen didn't talk about the ping. Not directly. She worked. She ate. She slept beside him. Her hands no longer trembled when she reached for things. Her voice had lost the tremor it carried that first night. But Rowan saw it. How she glanced at the blinds more often. How she kept her boots near the door. How she paused when distant engines passed outside. It wasn't fear. It was readiness. She wasn't planning to run. Not unless she had to. That morning, while Rowan recalibrated a broken atmospheric node in the corner, Nyreen sat cross-legged at the terminal, organizing old climate drift logs. She wore one of his shirts, sleeves rolled past the elbows, him brushing her thighs. The wrap was folded on the wall hook now, untouched for days. "You ever miss who you were?" she asked, not looking up. He answered without thinking. "No," then paused. "Sometimes, but not who I was with. Just what I believed in." She nodded slowly. "I miss who I thought I was going to be. Not the jobs, not the politics, just the possibility." He set the tool down. "You still have it." "I don't. Not on paper. Not in the system." Rowan crossed the room. "Then let's build something else." She looked at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. But the interruption came before she could do either. 3 knocks at the door. Not loud, not fast, but deliberate. Rowan froze. Nyreen's body stiffened instantly. Her hand went to the data terminal. He knew she was looking for a shutdown switch or a cord to pull. She didn't touch it yet. Rowan stepped quietly to the doorway, checked the side cam. It was a woman. Human. Mid-40s. Maintenance badge on her shoulder, grease on her hands. No weapons. No uniform. Just tired eyes and a clipboard. He opened the door half an inch. "Yeah." Checking grid linkages, she said. "Saw a consistent power draw from this block. Thought the relay was dead." "It's not. You got solar storage?" Rowan hesitated. "Yeah." "Surprised they haven't taken it from you yet. They don't know it's here." She didn't laugh. Just nodded once. "Any spare?" "Depends." She leaned in slightly. "There's a girl 3 floors down. Half Allen. Can't speak standard. Sick, maybe malnourished. Someone said she's been sleeping in a garbage chute. Thought maybe, if you had heat." Rowan didn't move. "I'm not running a shelter." The woman's voice didn't change. "Didn't say you were." She turned to go. Paused. Looked over her shoulder. But maybe someone once said the same about her. Then she walked away. Rowan closed the door. Locked it. Turned back. Nyreen stood in the middle of the room now. "You knew." He nodded once. "You don't even have to say it. She's like me." "I know. You going to help her?" "I don't know yet." She stepped forward. "Yes, you do. You're already trying to figure out how." Rowan's jaw worked slightly. "I barely held things together when it was just me," he said. "Then you came, and it changed everything. And now, if I open that door again, you won't close it." He met her eyes. "Neither will you." She stepped closer. Her hand slid into his. "I want her here. She might not want to be here. Then we make space. And wait." He exhaled slow, measured. Then he nodded. That night, they carried 2 thermal pads, 3 sealed ration packs, and a makeshift heater coil down 3 flights of stairs. The girl was where the woman had said, curled in the corner of an unused waste chute, skin a sickly yellow-green, hair matted, eyes half open. She didn't speak when they approached. She didn't resist when they wrapped her in heat foil and fed her broth from a squeeze tube. She just stared at Nyreen. Not Rowan. Only her. And when Nyreen brushed the girl's hair from her face and whispered, "You're not alone anymore," something in the child's eyes flickered. Recognition. Belonging. It wasn't a rescue. It was a reminder. Someone had once looked at Nyreen the same way and said, "You don't owe me anything." Now she was the one saying it back. When they returned upstairs, Rowan turned off the data rig for the first time in days. The silence was deliberate. Heavy. "She's going to stay," he said. "I know, and this place won't feel like ours anymore." Nyreen touched his chest. "No, it'll feel like something new." He looked at her, the woman who had stripped for food, who now stood clothed by choice, holding warmth in her hands, not offering it as currency. They weren't alone anymore. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like family. The heater coil pulsed with a low hum as morning light crept across the floor of the apartment. Eldrith, 7 still smelled like rust, old wiring, and wet stone, but inside this room, the air was warm. Clean. Lived in. The girl, no one knew her name yet, lay wrapped in 2 thermal layers near the wall vent. She hadn't spoken since Rowan and Nyreen brought her in, but she no longer flinched when touched. Her breathing had steadied. Her eyes, once vacant, now followed movement. When Nyreen set a bowl down in front of her that morning, the girl took it herself. Progress. Rowan watched from the desk. A diagnostics panel blinked quietly behind him, its process nearly complete. He hadn't updated the core logs in 3 days. The network hadn't asked, and even if it did, he wasn't sure he would answer. Nyreen stood at the small sink, rinsing a cup with steady hands. The shirt she wore was still his, but now it was stitched at the side with patches she'd made from old linen. The wrap, folded neatly on a shelf, hadn't been worn since she chose not to need it. She looked over her shoulder. She slept through the night. "Good," Rowan said. "She'll need weeks. Maybe more." "Same as I did," Nyreen replied. He nodded. "Same as I still do." That wasn't just a sentiment. It was truth. They'd stopped calling their time together anything temporary. Nyreen didn't talk about leaving anymore. She didn't ask what he wanted. He didn't ask if she felt safe. Everything had begun to settle, not into routine, but into something real. Earned. Later that day, Rowan brought home a second mattress. He found it in a half-collapsed infirmary, dragged it back on a repurposed utility sled. It was stiff, worn, but dry. He set it beside the cot without a word. Nyreen blinked. "You're kicking me out?" He smirked. "I'm giving the kid a place that's not the floor." She smiled. "That's new for you. Planning ahead. Don't get used to it." But she already had. That night, the girl curled onto the new mattress, her head on a folded towel. She reached for Nyreen's hand before falling asleep, and didn't let go until her breathing slowed. Nyreen knelt beside her until the girl was fully asleep, then stood and returned to the cot. Rowan was already lying down, one arm beneath his head, eyes watching the ceiling. "She's going to stay, isn't she?" he asked. Nyreen climbed in beside him. "You already knew that. I don't even know her name." "She'll tell us. Or she won't." Rowan looked at her. "You want to raise a child in this place?" "I want to raise a child with you. Wherever we are." That answer stopped him. Not with fear, but with certainty. It was quiet, unforced, no ceremony, no contract, just a decision made between 2 people who'd had everything stripped away and still reached for each other. He reached over, hand on her waist. "You think I'm good for that? You didn't touch me when I was starving. That was the day I knew." She shifted closer, her voice low. "You gave me back the right to choose." That's what children need to see. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was peace. The next morning, Rowan sent one final data package to the Haven core. Inside, no coordinates, no traceable records, just one line of entry. "This node is no longer active. The records you seek are still here, but they now belong to us." He powered the terminal down. Later, he stepped onto the balcony with Nyreen, both of them wrapped in his coat. The girl stood between them, barefoot, watching a storm cloud roll in over the horizon, distant, soft, not yet dangerous. For now, the world was still broken. The systems above still ignored the surface. But here, in one room, with one man, one woman, and one silent child, something whole had begun. Nyreen looked up at him. Rowan didn't say anything. He just held her hand. And this time, he didn't let go. Days passed, then a week. In Eldrith, 7 didn't change, but inside their apartment, everything had. The girl now had a name. Lyra. She'd whispered it one night to Nyreen, just once while half asleep. No surname, no origin, just Lyra. And it stuck. She spoke little, but began to hum softly when she thought no one was listening. She arranged food packets in color order. She liked to sleep with her hand on the heater coil. She smiled only when Nyreen brushed her hair. Rowan had fixed a backlight in the apartment, installed a second kettle, set up an old datapad with educational simulations. None of this had been discussed. It just happened, naturally like oxygen filling a vacuum. On the 11th day after Lyra's arrival, the rain finally stopped. And in the rare quiet that followed, Nyreen stood at the window, bathed in soft gold light, her fingers touching the glass. She wore a loose, sand-colored shirt now, one of Rowan's, but modified to fit her shape. No more ceremonial wrappings. No more trade-colored cloth. The way she stood, hip tilted, arms relaxed, looked like someone who finally recognized the space around her as her own. Rowan approached from behind. He didn't speak, just placed one hand lightly on her waist. Her voice came gently. "She's asleep." Finally, she asked if he'd still be here when she woke up. He nodded once. "Always." Nyreen turned, looked up at him. There was no tension in her jaw now, no armor in her posture. She wasn't the same woman who had undressed in a rain-soaked alley to survive. That woman had buried herself, right here in this apartment, and something stronger had grown in her place. "I've been waiting," she said quietly. "For what?" "For the silence to stop feeling dangerous." Rowan leaned in, touching his forehead to hers. "Does it still?" She shook her head slowly. "Now it feels like permission." And then, without hesitation, she kissed him, not with need, with choice. What followed wasn't urgent. He led her to the bed they now shared. She followed, fingers interlaced with his. They sat first, then lay together, not rushed, not afraid. When he touched her, it wasn't to explore, it was to remember. Her skin, once drawn tight from hunger, now felt alive under his hands. Warm, smooth, real. She undressed at her own pace, with steady breath, guiding his hands when they paused. Her body responded not with defense, but with welcome. Rowan took his time. Every movement asked a question, and every time, she said yes. Her hips arched to meet his. Her fingers traced along the curve of his spine, slow and grounding. She whispered his name, not for reassurance, but to anchor him. Their bodies moved in rhythm, not choreographed, but certain. She kissed the scar near his collarbone. He buried his face in her hair. No one had to speak to say what it meant. This wasn't a bargain. It wasn't an escape. It was the moment after survival, where pleasure didn't come from forgetting the past, but from finally feeling safe enough to live beyond it. When they finished, they stayed close. Nyreen rested her head on his chest. Her legs tangled with his. The sound of the city beyond their window returned, but this time, it wasn't an intrusion. Rowan exhaled deep and steady. "You okay?" he asked, brushing her hair back from her temple. She nodded. "Better than okay." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I feel like I'm mine again." Rowan wrapped both arms around her, pulled her closer. "You always were," he said. "You just needed time to remember." And in the silence that followed, there was no guilt, no fear, no unfinished questions. Just breathing and love.